All right, you filthy animals, gather round, because today we're going to rip apart the life of one of the most controversial motherfuckers of the 20th century, James Goldsmith.
He was a man who always seemed to find himself in the middle of a storm, either creating it or trying to ride it out.
This deep dive is going to be a wild one.
Yeah.
We're talking about a guy who went from fleeing Nazi-occupied France to hobnobbing with British high society, all while making a shit ton of money and pissing off pretty much everyone along the way.
A man of contradictions, to say the least.
So we got his Wikipedia page, a few articles. What else can we dredge up about this magnificent bastard? Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
First, let's rewind the clock back to his early years. This dude was born with a silver spoon up his ass, but had to haul ass out of France when the Nazis came knocking.
Imagine being a kid and having to ditch your cushy life and run from a goddamn war zone. It was certainly a formative experience. His family, prominent hoteliers, had to abandon their properties and escape on one of the last boats out of France. They ended up in the Bahamas, and Goldsmith was shipped off to boarding school in Canada. Quite a departure from the life he was accustomed to.
Talk about a fucked up childhood. But this guy was a hustler from day one. Dropped out of Eton after winning a shitload of cash on a horse race. Not exactly your typical trust fund baby content to just coast through life.
He had a knack for taking risks. At just 16, he won the equivalent of over £350,000 today on a bet and decided formal education just wasn't for him. He saw it as a sign to make his own way in the world.
Bowls of steel. So how'd this young risk-taker become a business titan? Was it all daddy's money, or did he actually have the brains to back it up?
Goldsmith was undeniably intelligent and had a keen eye for opportunity. He found early success with the British franchise for Alka-Seltzer and by bringing generic drugs to the UK market. Both smart moves capitalizing on existing demands.
Yeah, everyone needs an Alka-Seltzer after a night of heavy drinking. But things got more interesting, right? He wasn't content with playing it safe. He became a corporate raider. Tell me about that.
As his ambition grew, he developed a reputation for aggressive tactics in the corporate world, asset-stripping greenmail. He wasn't afraid to ruffle feathers or make enemies along the way.
Hold up. Let's break this down for our listeners who aren't finance bros. What the hell is asset stripping?
Think of it like this. You buy a company not because you believe in its potential, but to sell off its valuable parts for a quick buck. It's like buying a Ferrari just to part it out and sell the engine and tires separately. It can be a brutal strategy, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell of a company.
Damn, that's cold-blooded. What about this greenmail shit? Sounds like some ego-friendly bullshit.
More like corporate blackmail. Imagine buying up a ton of a company's stock and then threatening a hostile takeover. The company shits their pants and buys back their shares at a premium just to get you off their backs. Kinda like extortion, but perfectly legal back then.
So basically, he was holding these companies hostage for a fat fucking ransom. Classic Goldsmith, shaking things up and pissing people off. But this guy didn't stop at the corporate world, did he? He had a legendary feud with Private Eye magazine, those satirical bastards.
Ah, yes, their battles were legendary. Private Eye accused Goldsmith of involvement in a cover-up related to Lord Lucan, a high roller who disappeared after allegedly murdering his children's nanny.
Wait, Lord Lucan, wasn't that guy part of some elite gambling club? Talk about some shady shit.
Yes, the Claremont set a group known for their wealth and their love of gambling. Goldsmith was part of that circle. When Private Eye implicated him, he was furious and went after them with everything he had, using the UK libel laws to his advantage.
What was so fucked up about those libel laws?
At the time, the UK libel laws were heavily stacked in favor of the plaintiff, making it almost impossible for publications to defend themselves against accusations. Goldsmith dragged Private Eye through a long and expensive legal battle.
Sounds like he was trying to bankrupt those motherfuckers with lawsuits.
Yeah.
What a vindictive asshole.
It was a classic David versus Goliath situation, with Goldsmith the billionaire using his wealth and power to try to silence a small independent publication. Private Eye survived, but it wasn't easy.
Damn, this guy didn't fuck around. He clearly had a control issue. Didn't he try to start his own magazine, too?
He did. He poured a fortune into NOW, a weekly news magazine intended to compete with the likes of The Economist and Time. It seems he wanted a platform to shape public opinion.
But that shit went down in flames, right?
It did, and now W folded after just a couple of years.
Yeah.
Even billionaires make bad investments sometimes.
So we got this ruthless tycoon, a media mogul wannabe. When did this guy decide to jump into the world of politics?
That's where things get really interesting. Goldsmith's political awakening happened in the late 80s and early 90s. He became fixated on the European Economic Community and the rise of the European Union.
Okay, let's unpack this.
What?
Why was he so goddamn terrified of the EU?
He saw it as a threat to national sovereignty and a bureaucratic nightmare. He was particularly concerned about the growing influence of Germany within the bloc.
So he was basically a hardcore Eurosceptic before it was cool. Break it down for us. What the hell does that even mean?
Euroscepticism is a political stance that views the European Union with suspicion and often advocates for a nation's withdrawal from the bloc. Goldsmith saw the EU as undemocratic, economically inefficient, and ultimately doomed to fail.
Damn, sounds like he was predicting Brexit decades before it happened.
His ideas definitely resonated with people who felt ignored by mainstream politics. He gave them a voice.
Okay, so this guy's ranting and raving about the EU. Did he just bitch and moan, or did he actually try to do something about it?
Goldsmith wasn't one to just talk. He put his money where his mouth was and founded the Referendum Party in 1994. This single-issue party was all about getting the UK out of the EU.
Now that's putting your balls on the line. Did he actually run for office?
Oh, yeah. He ran in the 1997 general election. And get this, he used a VHS tape to bypass media censorship and get his message directly to voters.
A VHS tape. That's some old school guerrilla marketing shit. What the hell was on that tape? Was it like some fire and brimstone sermon against the evils of the EU?
He laid out his arguments against the EU, claiming it threatened British sovereignty and democracy. It was a direct appeal to voters bypassing the traditional media channels he distrusted.
So did he become prime minister and lead the UK out of the EU?
Not even close. His campaign failed to gain any real traction, and he died just 2 months after the election.
Damn, talk about bad timing.
Ah.
But you got to give a guy props for having the balls to challenge the establishment.
Huh.
He didn't give a shit about pissing people off. He just said what he thought, whether you liked it or not.
He was a maverick who defied convention. Agree with him or not, you can't deny his impact on British politics.
So he's covered his business dealings, his media battles, his political crusade. What about his personal life? This guy was married 3 times and had a whole brood of kids.
8 children, to be precise.
8 kids. Damn, the man was busy. Let's dish the dirt on those marriages. Were they all love matches, or was there some strategic maneuvering going on?
His first marriage was to a Bolivian heiress, Maria Isabel Patiño y Bourbon.
Ooh, heiress. Sounds like a match made in a bank vault.
Well, it was a whirlwind romance. They eloped when Goldsmith was just 20, and she was only 17. Tragically, she died just a few months later while pregnant with their first child.
Damn, that's fucked up. What happened?
She suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and died in a coma. It was a devastating loss for Goldsmith.
That's rough.
Yeah.
All right, what about wife number 2?
His second marriage was to Jeanette Leary. They had a son and a daughter before divorcing in 1978.
So no bitter custody battles or alimony drama?
Interestingly, they remained close even after the divorce. Goldsmith even built her a house on his estate in Mexico.
Sounds like he wasn't a complete asshole to his exes. Okay, what about wife number 3?
That would be Lady Annabel Burleigh. They already had 2 children together before marrying in 1978. One of their children, Jemima Goldsmith, later married Imran Khan, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan.
Wait, Imran Khan, the cricket star turned politician, small world.
Indeed, Goldsmith and Annabel had a 3rd child together, but their relationship wasn't without its complications. Goldsmith had an affair with Laure Boulet de la Meurthe, with whom he had 2 more children.
So he wasn't exactly a one-woman man.
His personal life definitely provided plenty of fodder for the tabloids.
This guy's life was one hell of a roller coaster. Insane business deals, epic legal battles, political crusades, a complicated love life. How do you even begin to sum up a life like that?
It's not easy. James Goldsmith was a mass of contradictions, brilliant and ruthless, charming and arrogant.
It sounds like he was a force of nature. All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. What are the key takeaways from this deep dive into the life of James Goldsmith so far? Hit me with your insights.
One thing that stands out is that Goldsmith was a man who refused to be put in a box. He was ambitious-driven and never backed down from a challenge. He wasn't afraid to make enemies or go against the grain.
He was definitely a rebel, but was he a hero or a villain?
That's not for me to say. He was a complex figure who defied simple categorization. He achieved great things, but also employed tactics that were, shall we say, less than ethical.
I guess you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, right? Okay, folks, stick with us because we're about to dig deeper into the legacy of James Goldsmith. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back, you beautiful disasters. Let's pick up where we left off and try to make some sense of this guy's legacy.
So we were talking about Goldsmith being like a proto-Brexiteer, right? But this guy was more than just some anti-EU nut job with a hard-on for nationalism. He had some pretty strong opinions about global economics and all that free trade bullshit. Yeah. What was his beef with that?
Goldsmith believed that unchecked globalization and free trade were screwing over developed nations. He argued that they led to job losses, a race to the bottom in terms of environmental regulations, and a decline in the quality of life for working-class people.
So he was basically saying, hey, all this globalization crap is making the rich richer and the poor poorer.
That was certainly a core part of his argument. He believed that multinational corporations were exploiting cheap labor and lax environmental laws in developing countries, while governments in the developed world turned a blind eye.
Sounds like he was calling out corporate greed way before it became trendy. Was this guy some kind of socialist or what?
Yeah. Not really. Goldsmith wasn't easily categorized. He was more of a populist. He understood how to tap into people's anxieties about globalization and the perceived loss of traditional values.
So he was riding that wave of economic anxiety decades before Trump came along and weaponized it.
There are definitely parallels. Goldsmith had a knack for channeling public frustration and turning it into a political movement. He wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, even when it made him unpopular with the elites.
Okay, so he was pissed off about globalization, free trade,
Right.
the EU. What else got this guy's panties in a bunch?
He was a vocal critic of mass immigration. He argued that it was destabilizing national identity and social cohesion, particularly in developed countries.
Yeah, immigration's always a touchy subject. What was his take on it? Was he just spouting xenophobic bullshit, or was there some nuance to his views?
Goldsmith believed that immigration needed to be controlled and managed in a way that benefited the host country. He wasn't necessarily against all immigration, but he felt that uncontrolled immigration could overwhelm public services, depress wages, and lead to social unrest.
So he wasn't just some build-a-wall asshole, right? He actually had some thought-out ideas about immigration policy, even if they were controversial.
He argued that mass immigration, particularly from cultures with vastly different values and social norms, could create tension and conflict. He was concerned about the impact of this on working-class communities who often bear the brunt of these changes.
I could see how that would appeal to people who feel like they're getting screwed by globalization and rapid social change. Was he ultimately right, though?
Whether his views on immigration were right or wrong is a matter of debate. But his ability to tap into a vein of public anxiety about these issues is undeniable. He gave a voice to those who felt ignored by the political establishment.
Okay, so this guy was a populist who's way ahead of his time, railing against globalization, the EU, mass immigration. It's pretty crazy how those same issues are still driving political debates today. What do you think he'd say if he could see the world now?
If Goldsmith were alive today, I think he'd feel a strange mix of vindication and despair. He'd see his warnings about globalization playing out, but he'd also witness the rise of the very forces he helped unleash: the populism, the nationalism, the anger, the division.
Yeah, he was a populist, but he wasn't a dumbass. He was a sharp guy who understood the complexities of these issues. I bet he'd be disgusted by how simplistic and tribal the political discourse has become.
He thrived on intellectual debate and nuanced arguments. He wouldn't have much patience for the sound bites and social media outrage that dominate politics today.
All right, so let's wrap up this part of the deep dive. What's the final verdict on James Goldsmith, visionary, or just a rich asshole who was out of touch with reality?
He was a bit of both, to be honest. He was brilliant, but also arrogant and often dismissive of those who disagreed with him.
Sounds like a real piece of work.
Yeah.
But you got to give him credit for shaking things up and making people think. Whether you agreed with him or not, he was a force to be reckoned with.
Absolutely. He was a larger-than-life character who left a lasting mark on British politics and the global conversation about globalization.
Okay, folks, stick with us. We're going to take a quick break and come back to delve into some of the more personal aspects of James Goldsmith's life. Stay tuned. Welcome back, you magnificent bastards. We've spent the last couple hours dissecting the life of Sir James Goldsmith, the tycoon, the media manipulator, the political firebrand. But let's get real.
Yeah.
Who the fuck was this guy behind all the money and the power?
That's the question, isn't it? He was a notoriously private man despite his very public persona.
Yeah, but this dude was married 3 times, popped out enough kids to start his own football team. There's got to be some juicy stories in there somewhere. What was he like as a husband? As a father? Give us the dirt.
What's complicated, accounts from those who knew him paint a bit of a contradictory picture. Some describe him as a loving and devoted family man, while others suggest he could be distant, demanding, emotionally unavailable.
So classic workaholic dad, right? Gets setting around the globe, closing deals, neglecting his kids.
Perhaps. He was undeniably ambitious and driven, often putting work above all else. It seems some of his children felt the weight of his expectations, struggled to live up to his standards.
But we did hear about him building a house for one of his ex-wives. It doesn't sound like a complete heartless bastard.
True, and by all accounts he did care for his children, even if he wasn't always the most emotionally present father. His relationships with them were complex and varied, much like the man himself.
All right, so maybe he wasn't a monster. But let's be real, this guy was no saint either. We've talked about his ruthlessness in business, his vindictiveness towards the press. Did any of that shit spill over into his personal life?
He certainly wasn't known for his humility or his willingness to compromise. Those who crossed him, even in his personal life, often felt the sting of his wrath. He could be incredibly charming and persuasive, but also manipulative and controlling.
Sounds like a real peach. You know, it's funny. We spend all this time digging into someone's life, trying to figure them out, and in the end, they remain a goddamn enigma.
It's the paradox of biography, isn't it? We gather facts, anecdotes, testimonies, but ultimately the essence of a person remains elusive.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the life of James Goldsmith, I gotta ask, what do you think this complicated, contradictory motherfucker would make of the world today? We got globalization running wild, the EU still kicking mass immigration,
Yeah.
all the shit he warned us about.
If Goldsmith were alive today, I imagine he'd feel a strange mix of vindication and despair. He'd see his warnings about globalization coming true, but he'd also be witnessing the rise of the very forces he helped unleash. The populism, the nationalism, the anger, the division.
Yeah, he was a populist, but he wasn't fucking moron. He was intelligent, articulate, capable of nuanced thought. I doubt he'd be impressed with the state of political discourse these days.
He'd likely be lamenting the decline of reasoned debate, the rise of social media echo chambers, the tendency to reduce complex issues to simplistic slogans.
All right, folks. That's all she wrote for our deep dive into the life and times of James Goldsmith. We covered his rise to wealth and power, his media battles, his political crusades, his complicated personal life, the whole goddamn circus.
He was a man who defied easy categorization, a force of nature who left an indelible mark on the world, whether you agree with his legacy or not.
Love him or hate him, you gotta admit the guy lives life on his own terms. He played the game by his own rules and didn't give a damn what anyone thought. That's gotta count for something.
It certainly makes for a fascinating story.
Damn right. So to all you beautiful degenerates out there, thanks for listening. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and don't let the bastards grind you down.